Ready to try to put down the projector?
Yeah. That would be great.
Ooh, I forgot the rubber bands.
Need rubber
So I
bands?
talked you into going down to the office in the mail room and grabbing a bunch of rubber bands.
Okay.
Big handful,
Big handful.
the thick ones.
This be enough, Dr. Steve?
Yes.
I'll just put it right here.
Spread them around.
So each student.
Yeah, each student gets one, but make piles like near the ends of the tables.
How's your morning going, Brady?
Not too bad. How's yours been?
Good.
Yeah. Finally solved the bed adhesion issues I was having with my 3D printer.
Yeah.
Bed adhesion issues, where my prints would just pop off like halfway through and then would lead to giant spaghetti monsters.
What was it?
I needed to use glue stick. Glue stick worked. Tried hairspray and hairspray didn't work. But glue stick does.
First, still together.
Yeah, I have a, well, so there was an incident probably like 6 months ago where I used to have a build tech surface, kind of like magnetic sandpaper. And I was printing on that. And I wasn't home to stop it. And it resulted in a large blue ball of plastic forming around the hot end, which proceeded to sand itself on the sandpaper, the build plate, which made it smooth. So I had to switch to a glass bed, and it's been a hassle ever since. But glue stick works, so that's good. I can actually use the printer again.
How much did you pay for your printer?
$250. It's an Ender 5, so I got a pretty good deal on it.
It could be more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Morning, folks. It's about that time. Do we have the YouTube session live?
Yep.
Wonderful. I'd like to start off with some concept tests. You guys can put those slides up. So, talking about phase changes, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and freezes at 0 degrees Celsius at atmospheric pressure. And the question is, what happens at higher pressures? Got 4 possibilities here. At higher pressures, water will boil at either a lower temperature or a higher temperature, and ice will melt either at a lower temperature or at a higher temperature. So what that means for ice, normally ice can exist as either a liquid or a solid at 0 degrees Celsius. But this is saying that if we exert enough pressure, can we have solid ice, say, at 1 degree Celsius? Or that's what, could I see the rest of that?
Yeah, sorry.
I think it's D. Yeah, it's D, that's the case. And in case C, if you increase the pressure, that may mean that you can have liquid water, say at minus 1 degree Celsius. So what happens to the boiling point and melting point of water if you increase the pressure? That's the question. So think about this for a bit, please. Get your cards ready. Anybody need more time? Okay, show me your cards. Folks online, just hit a letter under chat. Okay, what's it looking like on chat?
Mostly D's, 1A, 1B.
Okay. Could I get a volunteer to defend that A is correct, that at high pressure, water boils at lower temperature and ice melts at lower temperature? Could someone offer to defend that, please?
Yeah, I can do that. So I thought that at a higher pressure, the molecules would be moving faster. So because of that, I thought it would boil at a lower temperature because the molecules would already be moving fast. And then because they were moving faster, I thought maybe the ice would have to, or it would have to get to a lower temperature to slow those molecules down in order to form. Oh, I thought about that wrong. I was thinking the first part, but now I don't know on the ice melting at a lower temperature for sure. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Shelby, what's your last name?
Reynolds.
Reynolds, thank you. Can I get a volunteer to defend B, please? That at high pressure, water boils at a lower temperature and ice will melt at a higher temperature. Sir.
So I'll take a stab at it. It was more of an educated guess. I know from experience in the kitchen cooking, if I want water to boil faster, I can put a lid on the pot, which increases the pressure slightly. So I knew it had to be either A or B. And then I went with ice melts at a higher temperature, just because increasing the pressure kind of forces those molecules together. So they're more likely to slow down, I thought, at a higher temperature and not have to get all the way to 0.
Okay, what's your name, sir?
Josh Crossroad.
Okay. Can I get a volunteer to defend C, please?
I can do it.
Sir, please.
Well, I knew that at a lower temperature, you could get water to boil at a lower pressure, you could get water to boil at a lower temperature. So I figured if you want at a higher pressure, take more heat. And then I know that you can remove pressure to make something freeze at a higher temperature. So I figured that it'd be lower for higher pressure.
Okay, so could you give me an example of how you know that the first thing you said, that water will boil at a lower temperature at lower pressure?
I believe here in Idaho, since we have a lower pressure, it doesn't boil, it actually boils at a lower temperature than its level.
Okay, so water boils here at, instead of 100 degrees Celsius, it boils more like about 98 or 97.
Yeah.
And if you go up into the mountains, if you do a lot of camping, water boils at even lower temperature. Okay, could I get a volunteer, what's your name, sir?
Jordan Smith.
Okay, could I get a volunteer to defend D, please? Sir.
I thought that as you raise in altitude, I thought the air pressure drops.
Yes, that's right.
So I would say that at a higher, at sea level, that it would have to require a higher temperature because the air pressure isn't as high. So it requires a higher temperature for the water to boil. And same thing for the ice to melt.
Okay, so you agree with what was just said in that at lower altitudes, it does boil at higher temperatures, but the ice will melt at a higher temperature. So you'll actually have liquid, so you'll actually be able to have ice like at even 1 or 2 degrees if the pressure is high enough.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have some discussion on this.
Dr. Steve,
Uh,
you had a
what-
question on chat. Doesn't higher pressure increase temperature?
Yes, but we're talking about the temperature which things either either melt or boil, yes. But if you increase the pressure of a gas, of course, that's going to increase the pressure if the volume doesn't change. And in general, if you squish something, you'll increase its temperature because you're doing work on the object. But that's not the question here. The question here is what happens to the point at which water either boils or freezes if the pressure is changed? That's the question. It's not quite the same. So let's have some discussion.
So
I know with the concept of a pressure cooker is basically you increase the pressure on the water and that lets you cook something at higher temperatures without it coming to a boil. Oh, so I can strike out A and B, and I'm guessing that pressure would kind of force it towards whatever state it's most dense in, which is still water, so which is why I went with C instead of D.
Basically came to the conclusion that we still don't know.
Irritation.
Mhm.
Do we have anything on chat showing up?
Nothing yet.
That was an interesting point that was brought up here in class about density, in that that can be used to address this question. What is more dense, liquid water or solid water, or liquid water or gaseous water? Anything yet? Okay, our time is limited, so I'm going to go ahead and after at least hearing the defenses and having a chance to think about it, what are your responses? So go ahead and hold up your cards. What's it look like on chat?
It's bouncing between D and B. More D's than B though. There's only 2 D's.
Okay, any C's? Okay, initially we had more B's than any other response and fewer C's than any other response. In the classroom, we have close to a unanimous consensus that C is the correct answer. And did we have any C's on the chat show up?
No.
Okay, well, even so, we had how many B's or D's?
2 B's and then the rest are D.
How many are the rest?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so C is the majority. And that's actually good because C is the correct answer. In that, yeah, if you want to try to can beans, for example, or cook beans, you have to cook them for a very, very long time because water simply does not boil at a high enough temperature at this altitude. And a lot of things that you have to cook well, you end up having to use a pressure cooker at this altitude in order to get a higher temperature. And if you ever done any cooking, if you've, I mean, I love boiled eggs. And I would often take boiled eggs with me into the mountains. And frequently my campsites would be between 8,000 and 10,000 feet. To use feet instead of meters, I'm not sure you'd recognize if I said meters. But you'd have to boil that egg for about double the amount of time that you would, say, here in Pocatello to get it cooked the same amount because it doesn't get as hot a temperature when it boils. And that's why we have pressure cookers, so we can cook things at higher temperature. And in a pressure cooker, the water is boiling, but it's boiling at a higher temperature than what it is normally.
So let's cook things faster.
So that right there eliminates A and B. And as far as what's going on with the ice, now, if you squish something, if you apply a lot of pressure, have you ever noticed that ice will melt? In fact, that's what goes on. That's part of what's going on, say, under skis and ice skates. You get a much higher pressure, and that actually will lower the temperature at which ice will melt. So you'll basically have liquid water existing at temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius because of the high pressure. And that will create a rather slippery film that skis and ice skates can slide on. That's not the whole story. In fact, I posted something on our website for the Moodle site that goes into this a bit more detail, but that's part of the story. So the correct answer here is C. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we want to boil potatoes. And think not just of phase changes, but also of heat transfer. In that the heat transfer between objects, or the rate at which something either gains heat or loses heat, is proportional to the temperature difference. So the warmer something is, the greater the rate at which it will lose heat to its environment. And the colder something is, the greater the rate at which it will absorb heat from its environment. So with that idea, if you want to bring a bunch of potatoes in a pot of water to a boil and to do it using the least amount of energy, what do you turn your stove to? Low, medium, or high? That's the question. And get your cards ready. And show me what you're thinking. Low, medium, or high? Or high, low, or medium? What's it look online?
Almost unanimously C. 1B.
What? Almost unanimously what?
C, Charlie, and then 1 Baker. 1B.
Oh, okay. Anybody for A?
No.
Okay. Could I have a volunteer to defend A? In fact, that it's best to have the stove on high if you want to bring something to a boil using the least energy. Anyone? Okay, sir.
So my reasoning with this is that you're going to have to go through the same range of low to high temperatures as the water heats up. But you're going to lose the least amount of heat if you do this as quickly as possible.
Okay, so you're going to have to go through basically whatever temperature something is determines the rate at which it loses energy. And so the least time you spend at those temperatures, the least energy you spend. The least energy you lose. So to use the least energy, you want to bring it to a boil the quickest. Okay, could I get a volunteer to defend B, please, that you need to have the stove on low?
I can try.
Do?
So I chose B because I thought that it would absorb more like heat from the outside, I guess, forces rather, and then like that would use less energy, I guess, over time.
Would allow it to absorb more heat from the room to bring it to a boil?
Yeah.
Okay. Could I get a volunteer to defend C, that in fact we need to have the stove on medium? Anyone? I'm kind of surprised because we had more, was it more C's than, yeah, we had more C's than any other response. Okay, hearing none, let's go ahead and show me your cards, what you're thinking after hearing those defenses. I want to move on here. What's it look online?
Now they've switched to A.
Yeah, I'm seeing almost a unanimous A here. And I suspected that was the case when no one stepped forward to defend C. The defense for A, in fact, was quite convincing and quite correct in that the rate at which you lose heat from something depends on the temperature difference. And if you have to go through the same range of temperatures, the rate of heat loss at any given temperature is going to be the same in all cases. And so the least amount of heat lost will be where you spend the least amount of time at those intermediate cases. So A is clearly the correct one here. But for a related question, I think people might have been thinking of, let's go to the next slide. No, the one before that. You skipped too many.
Yeah.
Yes, the water is now boiling. To cook the potatoes using the least amount of energy, you should keep the heat on high, turn the heat to low, or turn the heat to medium to just barely keep the water boiling. So to be clear on the stove in question, medium is what is needed to barely keep the water boiling. Low will drop it so that it will not, or at least not have the water boil. High, of course, will have it boil. So again, to cook the potatoes using the least amount of energy. What do you do? I'm sure you were probably considering this question in the first one, so go ahead and show me your cards. What's it look like on the chat? You don't have one of those in your folder?
No,
It might
or
just
they,
stuck to something.
no.
I don't know how we.
What's it look like on the chat?
Unanimously C.
Okay, I don't think we need to discuss this then because C is the correct answer. And that's exactly what you need to do. And that once it's boiling, adding more heat to it is simply not going to change the temperature. You're just going to change the rate at which the water turns into a gas. So you're not going to do anything to the temperature. And it's the temperature that's important for cooking the potatoes because the amount of energy they absorb is determined by, well, the temperature difference, the temperature. And so by having the higher temperature, actually, you can't get a higher temperature than boiling point if you're cooking in water. So just having it the minimum amount of heat that you have to add to keep it boiling at that temperature is what you need to go by. Okay, so let's go to the blackboard. And as I said on Wednesday, heat is energy. It's basically kinetic energy on the molecular scale. And we can't really talk about hot or cold molecules because talking about a temperature of individual molecules is rather silly and really not appropriate. We have to talk about very large numbers of molecules before we can talk about anything resembling a temperature. We can, however, be very explicit on the kinetic energy a molecule has at any instant. That is something that we can define. So there is some relationship there. And you can add energy to a substance by doing work. And that could be through increased pressure or some sort of impact or some other process. And a nice demonstration for that is something called the fire syringe. And Braden loaded this up for me. And is that cotton or tissue paper in there?
Cotton.
Oh,
Cotton?
fire piston.
So yeah, some people call this the fire piston. Basically, if I jam this piston down, that'll compress the air in here. And if you squish air, of course, you're going to get an increase in temperature. And if this is well greased and we don't get air escaping when I jam the piston down, that temperature increase will be quite large, enough to exceed the ignition temperature for the cotton, which I must admit to my embarrassment that I'm not quite sure what it is in Celsius, but it's very, very close to 451 Fahrenheit. That number, for some reason, sticks in my head. But to see this, we need to turn the lights off. And it should show up in the camera there. I just need to be very quick with this. Did you see it?
Yep.
It definitely caught fire and burned. And let's go ahead and have the lights back on. And again, instead of a nice fuzzy piece of cotton there, I've got some black ash. It's clear that there's no cotton in there. It's just basically toasty stuff. Okay. I don't know if that shows up in the camera at all, but there is that. Something else to do to demonstrate this same sort of idea, I have a couple of steel balls here. And let's see, this involves getting, maybe we could do 6 feet. Can I get a volunteer to help me with this demonstration? It involves holding a piece of paper. Yeah? So just hold this out at arm's length. And I'm going to basically whack these steel balls together with the piece of paper between them. And I can give these balls quite a bit of kinetic energy. When they collide, that energy goes away into basically an elastic recoil a little bit. But this is not purely an elastic collision. Remember our discussion about that with momentum conservation? We lose energy to sound as well as heat. And I've talked about heat being the most common, where most of the energy goes, that we end up losing in an inelastic collision. So go ahead and hold the piece of paper out. And I'd like you to smell that.
Oh, it smells burnt.
Yes, in fact, let's go ahead and pass that around. If you look at the piece of paper, you will notice that the edges are brown and crispy like burnt paper.
Can we
You
get
just
it on
set
the
it down. And go ahead and look at that. And then I'd like to have it passed around. So once you get a chance to look at it and maybe even smell it, the smell will fade in a little bit. But you can at least see that the edges are brown and crispy. And for those of you at home who want to do something similar, it won't work as well with, I mean, this is very large steel bearings that are really good for this. You could do something kind of like this if you have pool balls, but it doesn't work as well, but you can do something close. Another variation on this is instead of nice stainless steel balls, we use rather rusty iron balls. These are mining milling balls that are frequently shipped from the mines up in Montana down to an industrial plant near Salt Lake City, where they're milled to get rid of dents and nicks and scratches, because these are basically put in gigantic drums, and the whole drum is rolled, and the balls, as they fall and move around, crush the ore. So, ma'am, what's your name?
Corinne Brunson.
Could I get someone else to volunteer to help with this demonstration? Same sort of situation. You're going to hold this aluminum foil out. Ma'am, could you help out? And let's turn off the lights. So again, hold this at arm's length. And let's get the lights. And here we're going to do the same thing, but it's metal. So anyone want to anticipate what's going to happen here?
It'll spark.
Spark. Why would we get sparks?
Oh, I guess I just assumed because when it collides together, and this is like different than paper, it's aluminum, so I thought maybe it would produce a spark.
Okay, well, actually, that's what we should expect, because we are going to get a lot of heat formed, but primarily we'll also have iron oxide in the mix with aluminum oxide. And if you mix iron oxide and aluminum oxide, you actually get a compound. Does anybody know what that compound is called when we mix aluminum oxide and iron oxide?
Thermite.
Yes, it's called thermite. So yes, I would anticipate a spark or two. But like the paper was burned, we would hope also to see slightly melted spots where all that kinetic energy went into thermal energy. So yeah, we got a spark or two. Let's go ahead and turn the lights on. And let's go ahead and do the same, pass this around. You shouldn't probably not get much of a noticeable smell unless you're familiar with the scent of burned aluminum. You might sense more of a metallic scent to that. Ma'am, what's your name? Okay. And all of this is leading to essentially the first law of thermodynamics. And I think now is a good time for the rubber bands. So those of you at home, I'm hoping you've had the opportunity, since my frantic email last night, to scrounge a thick rubber band if you have it. The kind they put around like asparagus. I love asparagus. Works really well for this, or these kind of thicker rubber bands. I'd like everybody to get a rubber band and resist the urge to play with it, because we want these in thermal equilibrium with the room, and we don't want to be doing work on it. We don't want to be stretching them right just yet. And I was trying to think of a way to do this with a mask, but I'm thinking, since we don't want to have people taking off their masks, let's use your throat. And before you get too worried about rubber bands and your throat, let me just explain what I'm going to do. And I want you to watch what I'm doing and not actually do it. So set the rubber bands down, don't touch them. And you want to grasp the rubber band, thumb and forefinger on each hand. So I'm going to try to hold it close here so that your thumbs are about maybe 2 centimeters apart. And then what you want to do is you want to very, very quickly stretch the rubber band and touch it. Oh, that didn't work well. Okay, let's try that again. Touch it to some part on your throat that is going to be sensitive to temperature. So stretch and touch. And normally I'd have you do this to your upper lip, which is about the most temperature sensitive part on your face. So I'd like everybody to try that. Get a piece of a rubber band and keep it relaxed, and then suddenly stretch about 2 centimeters of it, and then quickly touch it to your throat below your mask. What did you feel? It felt warm, didn't it? That's because you're doing work on the system. You're applying a force over a distance. The work you're doing is then showing up in an increase in internal energy of the rubber band, and so it should feel warm to you. Now let's do something else. Let's take again about that 2 centimeters and stretch it and keep it stretched, and try not to like do this to it. So have steady hands, just keep it stretched. Don't let it relax. And count to about 10. 1, 2, 3. Got to have a sort of attention span. Let it relax really quickly and touch it to your throat. What did folks feel? Did it feel hot like it was before or warm? Are you feeling your fingers? Because it should feel cool to your throat. So stretch it, keep it stretched for a while, and get it close to your throat. Relax it quickly and touch that rubber band to your throat. A lot easier to do this on your lip than your throat, but it should feel cool because now it's the rubber band that's doing work at the expense of its internal energy, and so it will be colder. And you see this, if anybody has propane cylinders, you've got a gas that's quite compressed, and if you release the valve, that gas expands, doing work at the expense of its internal energy, and it gets quite cold. The house I grew up in had propane heat, and the tank was above ground and outside, and frequently, we especially noticed it in the spring or fall, in that right where the pipe came out of the tank, where the gas is first expanding, there'd often be ice collecting there because it got so cold. Because again, the gas is expanding rapidly and doing work. This is also how a refrigerator works. In a refrigerator, you've got gas that's compressed in a compressor, and it basically squishes that gas. And that increases the temperature. But that compressor is on the bottom and back of the fridge, and the cooling and the coils there basically dump that heat into your room. But then that compressed gas is allowed to expand through pipes that go throughout the refrigerator. And that expanding gas does work at the expense of its internal energy. It gets really, really cold, and will actually suck energy away from the stuff inside the fridge. That gas is then circulated back to the compressor where it's squished again, and it gets really, really hot, but that heat is dumped into the room, and then the gas is again allowed to expand. And this is also what happens in a heat pump, but in the reverse. Instead of trying to get rid of the, well, imagine your house as being kind of like the, okay, imagine the refrigerator kind of moved up to a doorway so that what is cool is the stuff that's actually being exhausted outside, but the compressor is dumping the heat into your room. That's what's going on with the heat pump. In fact, in college, I knew some folks that there were a few houses that they rented that the rent was fixed and all the utilities were included. the electricity that is. However, they had to pay for the oil that went into the heating. So they had to pay for heating oil, but electricity was free. So one thing they did is they decided they really didn't need to use the kitchen door, and they had a spare refrigerator that they just pushed open to that door and have it continually try to cool the outside while the back of the fridge heated up the kitchen, using electricity basically to do their heating. So a refrigerator will double as a heater if you're really desperate. And certainly you could take an air conditioner and just turn it around in the winter to cool down the outside and heat the inside. And those are both examples of what we call a heat engine. And I've got one over here that,
You'll have to plug it back in.
yeah, go ahead and plug it back in. And once it starts, we really want it to get basically do the hissing for quite a while before it's ready.
Okay.
So yeah, I know it's annoying, but we'll just have to deal with
Some
it.
people were complaining that they couldn't hear you.
Oh. Okay. Okay. But what I was essentially describing was the first law of thermodynamics. Basically, the first law of thermodynamics is that energy is conserved. I don't know, is there like a box we could put over this to muffle the sound if that's really bothering folks? In that, basically, if you add energy or heat to a system, that will show up in an increase in internal energy of the system and possibly work done by the system. And using symbols, if we call Q the heat, W the work, and U the internal energy, the heat added to a system, or Q, will equal the work that that system does, plus a change or an increase in its internal energy. Or you can change internal energy, and this is directly proportional to the temperature. In fact, it's 3 halves nRT, where R is the gas constant. We're not going to go into that kind of detail, but the internal energy is directly proportional to the temperature. Did I thought maybe a little?
Just a little bit.
Maybe a little. Okay. And the second law is, well, there's a lot of ways of phrasing it, a lot of them in context with heat engines. But basically, the statement is that heat flows from hot things to cold things. Or, as the book phrases it, heat will not flow from a cold object to a hot object. But there is a caveat there, unless work is done on the system. Because that's essentially what's being done in a heat pump or refrigerator. So let's bring up that, let's see, is this thing ready? Just so it's not annoying folks as much. What I have here is basically an electric heater that's heating up some water and bringing it to a boil inside this enclosed chamber. And I've sealed off the valve now, so it's not allowing it to vent. So it should be building up pressure. And hopefully it won't explode. They've been known to do that. In fact, that was a common form of cause of death if you go back 100 years or more, 100 to 150 years ago, in that these chambers where we would boil water in steam engines would, if valves became faulty, sometimes explode and kill people. But I've got another valve over here that if I open up, will allow steam to go into this piston that could possibly turn this flywheel. Now let's see if we have a high enough pressure for that. Yes. So the escaping steam, oh, you have to worry about the CO2 yourself, leaking steam in. Oh, we're making everything wet. I'm making a mess. Okay. Oh, that's kind of blocking people's views. I'm just trying not to get everything wet. So we have our heat engine. Okay. I turned off the electric heater and it still runs because, well, we still have that pressure. And let's actually kind of see how long it will take it to run down. Let's go ahead and go with the next slide on those PowerPoints. This one? Yeah. So, if you put 10 joules of electric energy into an electric heater, out will come 10 joules of heat. Is there any way in actual practice you can get more than 10 joules of heat from a device if your electric input is only 10 joules? And it's either yes or no. So think about this for a bit. Anybody need more time? Okay, go ahead and show me your cards. Yes or no? What's it looking like on chat?
B.
Any A's?
No.
Okay, the only A's are in the classroom. Could I get a volunteer to defend A, please? That yes, we can. Anyone? Can I get a volunteer for somebody to defend B? That no, we can't.
I can do it.
Please do.
I said no because I believe that there is a law that says energy cannot be created or destroyed, only changed.
Okay. What's your name, sir?
Jordan Smith.
Okay. And which of those laws looks like that, the first or the second?
I can't fully see it.
Okay. Basically, the first law says energy is conserved. The second law is that heat only flows from hot things to cold things.
By the way, your motor thing just officially stopped.
Other thing?
The motor thing.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
It took it a while though. Okay, since it was close to a unanimous and nobody actually, only a couple of people chose the correct answer, which is A, I'm not sure discussion will be constructive at this point. In that, remember what I said that those engineering students did in that house that they rented with the refrigerator? If they'd basically instead plugged in an electric heater, they would have gotten 10 joules. But because they plugged in the refrigerator that as well was doing work, they would get more like 12 joules of energy dumped into their kitchen. And that's the whole idea behind a heat pump.
Oh, by adding work to their system, you
Yes.
increase its temperature change.
So we're missing something, and that's work done. So switching real quick, one way to think about these heat engines is if we have something that's hot and something that's cold, think of this as kind of like a bar graph. We take a certain amount of heat out that's proportional to the width here. I'm going to call that QH. And then we're going to take some of that some of that heat, and turn it into work. So the width of this little bar here is the work done. And the heat we end up dumping into the cold reservoir is this width. So basically, first law tells us that QH will equal the work done plus QC. So the heat we take out of the hot reservoir that energy will either go into work or into heat dumped into the cold reservoir. So using arrows, we pulled in amount of heat, QH, that's proportional to the width of this thing, and we turn part of that width into work and the rest into heat we dump into the cold engine, the cold reservoir. And so we can run this backwards. We can instead force heat to go from something cold into something hot, provided we do work on the system. So this is an engine, and this is a heat pump or an air conditioner. And that we can make, and that's the reason for the caveat here, we can make heat go from something cold to something hot, but only if we do a large amount of work. And in fact, yeah, that's more like it. You have to do a large amount of work to pull that cold stuff out. And so this is also kind of what's going on with the refrigerator, in that you're taking heat from the cold interior of the refrigerator, and you're dumping that into the room along with a whole lot of extra heat that's basically from the work that's done by compressing that gas. So that's the whole idea behind the heat pump. And if I were to build a house, instead of just buy one or rent one, and if I knew that I'd be living in that house for a couple of decades, I would put in a heat pump. They're very expensive to put in, but it's about the most efficient way of heating or cooling a house, because you just run it in reverse in the summer to cool your house, and then you run it the other way in the winter to heat your house. So it's basically like a massive air conditioner that works both ways. Okay, let's hit the very last question. I think we have a moment for it. So this was an idea proposed to generate power. Water on top of the Gulf of Mexico is fairly warm, but deep down the water is quite cold. It's actually fairly distinguishing for that feature. There are very few bodies of water on the planet that have the temperature difference that we see in the Gulf of Mexico over comparatively short distances in depth. The plan is to heat some gas with some warm water up on the top so it expands, then cool the gas with water from the bottom so it won't contract. And the gas is ultimately expanded and contracted so it drives the piston back and forth, and then this powers an electric generator to make electricity. So again, a yes or no question, will this work or not work? And this is kind of a lead into discussion on the third law of thermodynamics, which I hope to spend almost all of Monday getting into. So basically, does this sound like it might work or not work? Is there something here that seems to violate one of the laws that we've talked about already? Go ahead and show me your cards. Okay, what's it look like on the chat?
A's.
Okay, any B's?
No.
Okay, we do have some B's in the classroom. So could I get a volunteer to defend A that yes, this could work? remote, go ahead and just speak up. Sir?
My thoughts on the matter are that while it sounds like it could work in theory, the energy and the work it would take to actually get the system to function would consume more energy than it would provide.
Okay, could I get somebody to comment on B, in that, no, this should not be made to work, this couldn't work? Sir?
Well, I guess if you can, like consecutively get the gas to expand and contract, like offsetting each other, that you might do it back and forth.
That almost sounds like a defensive A.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I meant to put it.
Okay, that's still another alternate explanation. Mr. Hunter, yes?
Yep.
Could anyone volunteer to defend B? Okay, we're short on time, and it was virtually unanimous anyway. A is the correct answer here. Yes, you can make this work, and in fact, I think there's been a total of 4 of these that were built. The company that built them went out of business, they lost money, they went bankrupt. The company that bought them and tried to run them right after that went bankrupt and went out of business. So they are still running, but their maintenance costs are really, really close to the cost of basically what they can sell the electricity to generate for. And it's iffy if they'll ever, in fact, recoup the cost of their development and their construction and the research that went into them. But yes, these are very, very low efficiency engines. They were put in place when we thought that the energy situation was a lot more dire than what it seems to be looking right now. But yeah, the piston is huge. It's a single piston thing, and the thing is like 20 stories tall. And so each stroke took quite a while, but it did work and it did generate electricity. They do generate electricity, just not very well. There's nothing that we've talked about that would say that this would be impossible. They are clearly taking advantage of a temperature difference. And as long as there's a temperature difference, heat will flow from something hot to something cold, and you can siphon off a fraction of that energy as work. Whenever that happens, how much you can siphon away, that's where the third law comes in, but siphoning away a little bit is always possible. And that's a good point to end on. Thank you for your attention. We'll do an in-class activity on Monday, one of these labs, and if at all possible, please attend in person. And if not, you'll need to assemble the materials in the email I sent out earlier this week. Thank you for your time and attention.
So basically, it ended up summing it up pretty nicely. When I said you could do it, but it would be so inefficient that it would never really